August 1944, Isigny, France. An American metallurgist kneels beside a knocked-out Panther tank. He taps the glacis plate with a hammer. It rings hollow. He taps again. The sound echoes wrong, brittle, crystalline, dead. Behind him, two more Panthers sit motionless in the Norman mud. All three wear the same scars, jagged cracks radiating from impact points like spider webs. One has a hole punched clean through 80 millimeters of frontal armor. Another shows something impossible. Sections of side armor simply gone, blown away by a 75 millimeter high explosive shell that should have barely scratched the surface. The metallurgist runs his gloved fingers along a fracture line. The steel has failed along crystalline boundaries, shattering like glass instead of deforming like proper armor. This isn't battle damage. This is metallurgical suicide. He pulls a field knife and chips a sample from the edge of the breach. The fragment breaks off easily, too easily. Back in the mobile lab, his assistant is already heating the arc furnace. They need answers. Because if German armor has failed this catastrophically, if their vaunted engineering has collapsed into brittle metal that cracks under fire, the war just changed. What the Americans are discovering in that French field is the culmination of a 3-year collapse. A story of brilliant metallurgy destroyed by desperation. Of strategic bombing campaigns targeting not factories, but chemistry itself. Of mines in Norwegian mountains and nickel refineries in Finland. Of carbon percentages and heat treatment failures, and forced laborers who knew exactly which valves to turn, which temperatures to ignore. The Germans had designed perfect steel. Then they lost the elements that made it work. Stay with this story, because the death of German armor didn't happen on the battlefield. It happened in the periodic table. 1934. The Krupp Steelworks, Essen. German metallurgists are writing the future of armored warfare. Not with thickness, with chemistry. Their innovation is chromium-molybdenum steel. Unlike the nickel-chromium alloys favored by other nations, the German formula relies on two critical elements. 1.5% chromium for hardenability, 0.5% molybdenum for toughness and corrosion resistance. The combination creates armor with tensile strength exceeding 130,000 psi and 20% elongation, meaning it can absorb massive kinetic energy without shattering. Early Panzer III and IV tanks carry this steel into Poland and France. Test results are extraordinary. The armor bends before breaking. Shell impacts create smooth, ductile failures. Welding seams hold under stress. But there's a dependency few recognize. Germany produces 0 molybdenum domestically, 0 nickel, almost 0 tungsten. Every kilogram arrives by ship or train from Norway, Finland, Sweden, the Balkans. The entire armored force depends on supply lines stretching across occupied Europe. By 1941, Army engineers notice the first warnings. Molybdenum stocks are tightening. The invasion of the Soviet Union has failed to capture critical mining regions as planned. Finland's nickel supply is reliable but finite. Norway's Knaben mine, Europe's only operating molybdenum source, produces barely enough. Then the real problem emerges. Substitution attempts begin. Engineers try boosting carbon content to maintain hardness without molybdenum. They triple manganese percentages. They experiment with vanadium. Each change introduces new risks: increased brittleness, reduced weldability, unpredictable behavior under impact. By late 1942, molybdenum vanishes from armor under 50 mm thick. Engineers assure command they can compensate with careful heat treatment. Just maintain precise quenching temperatures. Just ensure proper tempering cycles. Just don't ask what happens when production demands triple. When factories fill with untrained workers. when Allied bombers find the Norwegian mines. The chemistry is unforgiving. Miss the molybdenum, adjust the carbon wrong, rush the heat treatment, and steel becomes ceramic, hard, brittle, deadly to its own crews. March 1943. Emergency meeting, Waffenamt Materials Division. The telegram from Knaben Mine sits on the conference table. British mosquitoes, 10 aircraft, direct hits on the Washin plant. Production stopped. The head engineer stares at material requisition forms stacking higher each week. Panther tanks entering production. Tiger production ramping up. Ferdinand tank destroyers being built. Every vehicle needs tons of specialized steel. And now their primary molybdenum source is rubble. "We have stockpiles," someone offers, "for 6 months, maybe 8. The engineer picks up a different document, experimental steel formulations. Someone has been preparing for this moment, trying to reverse engineer toughness without molybdenum. The replacement formula increases carbon from 0.40% to 0.63%. Manganese triples from 0.30% to 1.1%. Chromium stays high, over 2%. On paper, it maintains hardness numbers. On paper. "What about heat treatment?" asks a production manager. The engineer hesitates. Traditional tempering requires gas torches, careful temperature control, specific cooling rates. The new high-carbon formula is sensitive. Miss the temperature window by 50 degrees and martensite crystals form. The steel hardens beyond specification, becomes glass brittle. We'll need strict quality control. With what workers? The skilled men are conscripted. We're filling factories with Ostarbeiters and prisoners. Silence. The workshop tests begin anyway. Sample plates heated, quenched in oil baths, tested under hydraulic presses. Some perform adequately. Others showed disturbing fracture patterns, crystalline breaks instead of fibrous tears. The inconsistency is alarming. An inspector in Brandenburger Eisenwerk notices something during a late shift. A forced laborer adjusting quenching bath temperature. The thermometer reads 50 degrees too high. When confronted, the man shrugs, doesn't speak German, doesn't need to. Sabotage doesn't require explosives. Just a valve, a thermostat, a few degrees of temperature variation applied across thousands of armor plates. November 1943 brings the second blow. American B-17's 130 bombers pulverize Knaben again. Molybdenum supply, critical. Quality control, collapsing. Production demands, increasing. The equation no longer balances. January 1944, Kursk Salient, Eastern Front. A Tiger commander watches his gunner score a direct hit on a T-34 at 1,200 meters. The Soviet tank brews up instantly. Textbook engagement. Then he notices the loader staring at their own hull. A 76mm shell has struck their side armor, non-penetrating hit, just a deflection. But the impact point shows something wrong. The steel around the strike has cracked. Not the smooth indentation expected from proper armor steel. Spiderweb fractures. "Sir?" "Keep moving." He doesn't report it. What would he say? The tank still fights. The armor still stops shells. Mostly. 2 weeks later, different crew, different Tiger. An 85mm round hits the turret side at an angle, should ricochet. Instead, the impact zone fragments. Chunks of armor plate the size of a fist break away from the interior surface. One kills the loader instantly. The tank survives. The crew doesn't trust their protection anymore. Reports accumulate in battalion headquarters. Welding seams failing under stress. Unusual cracking near impact points. Armor fragmenting after non-penetrating hits. Maintenance officers examine damaged vehicles with growing alarm. The new production tanks, identifiable by subtle differences in plate finish, fail differently than early war machines. Old Panthers show ductile damage, dents, plastic deformation, smooth failures. New Panthers show brittle damage, cracks, spalling, crystalline fractures. A Stug 3 takes a 75 mm HE hit to the side. The shell doesn't penetrate, doesn't need to. The explosion cracks the armor plate so severely that fragments break off inside the fighting compartment, killing 2 crew members. Western Front commanders start receiving similar reports from Normandy. American tankers notice that some Panthers shed armor sections after repeated hits. British intelligence officers photograph turrets cracked by glancing 75 mm rounds. The metallurgical catastrophe is now operational. Crews begin requesting older tanks, anything built before mid-1943, anything that still has real steel, not this brittle impostor that shatters like pottery. Allied Intelligence Headquarters, London, June 1944. The metallurgy reports from captured Panthers are distributed across 3 agencies: British Intelligence, American Ordnance, Soviet Technical Bureaus. All reach identical conclusions. German armor quality has collapsed. A brigadier slides spectroscopic analysis across the table. Molybdenum content 0.17% in new production, down from 0.5% in 1942 samples. Nickel, trace amounts only. Carbon, dangerously high at 0.68% in some plates. The numbers tell a story of substitution, desperation, and failing chemistry. How widespread? Panthers built after February 1944 show consistent defects. Tigers vary, some good, some catastrophic. Production quality is erratic. Strategic implications cascade. If German armor is brittle, American 75 mm guns become more effective. British 17-pounders can penetrate frontally at longer ranges. Soviet 85 mm guns, previously marginal against heavy German tanks, now crack armor plates open. The tactical calculus shifts. Field manuals update. Aim for welding seams, they fail under stress. Multiple hits on the same area will induce cracking. High explosive shells against side armor can cause catastrophic spalling. But there's a deeper question. Why? British intelligence traces supply chains. Nickel refineries in Norway, bombed. Manganese mines in Nikopol, Ukraine, lost to Soviet advances in February 1944. Molybdenum from Knaben, destroyed twice, production never recovered. Finnish nickel from Petsamo, supply uncertain. Germany is fighting with chemistry it can't obtain. A Soviet technical officer examines a destroyed Panther Ostfagay. The glacis plate shows carbon content of 0.75%, 50% higher than maximum recommended for armor steel. Manganese at 1.2%, 4 times normal. The combination creates steel that's hard enough to pass hardness tests, but lacks the internal structure to absorb shock. It's armor by numbers only. Under impact, the crystalline structure fails catastrophically. The tank becomes its own fragmentation grenade. Production statistics tell the final story. 6,000 Panthers built, hundreds lost to mechanical failure, hundreds more to armor that couldn't protect their crews. The steel shortage isn't limiting German tank production. It's killing German tank crews. July 24, 1944. Normandy bocage, dawn light filtering through trees. The Panther commander peers through his cupola. 300 meters ahead, Sherman tanks are moving through the hedgerow. He estimates 5 targets. His 75 mm L-70 can punch through their armor at this range like paper. Gunner, target tank left. The first 76 mm round hits their glacis plate. It doesn't penetrate. The American shell ricochets upward with a metallic shriek. Standard deflection, textbook. Then the commander hears it. Crack! Not the impact. This comes half a second later. A sharp crystalline snap like ice breaking. He looks down. A fracture line has appeared in the glacis plate, running from the impact point toward the driver's compartment. The crack is widening. Reverse! Reverse now! The driver throws gears. The Panther lurches backward. Another 76mm round hits their right side armor. 60mm, thick, angled, should stop it easily. The plate doesn't stop anything. It shatters. The projectile punches through brittle steel that offers no resistance. The shell enters the crew compartment at waist height, detonates against the ammunition storage. The gunner has 1 second to understand what's happening before the Panther's own shells cook off. The commander is thrown clear by the explosion. He lands in the mud, ears ringing, watching his tank burn. The side armor where the shell penetrated looks wrong. The edges of the hole are fractured, crystalline. Chunks of armor plate litter the ground around the chassis. That wasn't penetration. That was disintegration. 200 meters away, another Panther takes 3 75mm HE shells against its side. The third shell doesn't penetrate. Doesn't need to. The armor plate develops stress fractures, then simply breaks away in sections. Crewmen bail out screaming, their protection stripped away by metallurgical failure. The commander watches American tankers advance cautiously, expecting heavier resistance. They don't understand yet. The Panthers aren't dangerous anymore. They're coffins wrapped in glass. Watertown Arsenal Metallurgical Laboratory, Massachusetts, August 1944. The sample sits under the electron microscope. 3.25 inches of Panther glacis plate, flame cut from a vehicle captured in France. The microstructure tells a brutal story. Dr. Richardson adjusts the magnification. Normal armor steel shows fibrous fractures, elongated grain structures that absorb energy by deforming plastically. This sample shows something else entirely. Crystalline fracture planes, massive martensite formations, grain boundaries decorated with carbide precipitates. Run the spectroscopy again. The results confirm initial readings. Carbon, 0.68%. Far above the 0.50% maximum for weldable armor steel. At these concentrations, carbon forms iron carbides that segregate along grain boundaries, creating microscopic stress concentrators. Under impact, these boundaries become fracture initiation sites. Manganese, 1.15%, triple the recommended amount. Combined with excessive carbon, this creates a hardening effect that increases brittleness exponentially. Chromium, 2.1%, high but manageable, except without sufficient molybdenum to moderate its grain coarsening tendency. Molybdenum, 0.15%, a trace, useless. The metallurgical failure chain is clear. Molybdenum normally prevents temper embrittlement and maintains fine grain structure during heat treatment. Without it, the high chromium content causes grain coarsening when the armor remains at elevated temperature during cooling. Large grains mean reduced toughness. But the heat treatment evidence is worse. Richardson examines the hardness gradient across the plate thickness. A properly tempered plate shows consistent hardness throughout. This sample shows extreme variation. Surface hardness 280 Brinell, core hardness 240 Brinell, with severe gradients indicating improper quenching. Oil quenching. The evidence is unmistakable. Oil quenching induces rapid surface cooling while the core remains hot, exactly what creates differential thermal stress and residual tension. The plate emerges harder than specification requires, but with internal stresses that make it fracture-prone. Impact resistance? The technician checks his notes. 23 foot-pounds at room temperature. Should be 70 minimum for armor steel. Richardson writes his conclusion. The armor plate examined demonstrates metallurgical characteristics wholly unsuitable for ballistic protection. Brittle failure under impact is inevitable. The Germans have created armor that passes hardness tests, but shatters under fire. Panther Crew Barracks, Western Front, September 1944. Unteroffizier Schmidt sits on his bunk writing a letter he knows sensors will destroy. His hands shake slightly, not from fear of combat, but from knowing his own tank will kill him. The armor cracks like porcelain. We joke that we're riding in a steel coffin, but it's not steel anymore. It's something else, something wrong. Across the room, his driver refuses to sleep. The man saw what happened to Mueller's crew. Their Panther hit by a 75mm HE shell that shouldn't have penetrated. The armor section simply broke away. The explosion that followed was their own ammunition. Morale reports document the psychological collapse. Crews request transfers to older Panzer IVs. Some refuse new Panthers entirely, claiming mechanical excuses. Commanders know the truth. The men don't trust the protection anymore. A loader describes the sound. You hear the hit, normal. Then this crack, like ice on a frozen lake. You know the armor has failed before you see the damage. Allied POW interrogations reveal German tactical adaptations born from metallurgical terror. Panthers stay hull down, minimizing exposure. Commanders position Panzer IVs 1,000 meters behind Panther formations to protect their vulnerable sides. Crews angle tanks obsessively, knowing direct hits will crack the plates. From a captured diary, better to be hit in 1942 steel than protected by 1944 garbage. The old tanks bent, these shatter. I've seen turret armor crack from a glancing blow. How do you fight when your protection is brittle as glass? In Brandenburger Eisenwerk, a German inspector finds another sabotaged cooling bath. The temperature gauge has been manipulated from months. Thousands of armor plates improperly heat-treated. He doesn't report it. What's the point? The molybdenum is gone. The nickel is gone. The manganese is running out. They're welding together coffins and calling them Panthers. Soviet Ni-48 Testing Facility, Moscow, October 1944. Two captured Panther Ausf G tanks sit in the firing range. Engineers have specific orders. Determine why German armor is failing so catastrophically. The first test fires an 85mm BR-365K round at the glacis from 1,500 meters. Standard anti-tank engagement range. The shell should ricochet. The angle is steep. The armor nominally 80mm thick. The round penetrates. Not through ballistic force, but because the armor cracks on impact. The fracture propagates along crystalline boundaries, and the shell punches through compromised steel that offers minimal resistance. A Soviet metallurgist examines the breach. Crystalline fracture, no ductility. This isn't armor steel, it's high-carbon structural steel poorly heat-treated. They test the second Panther's side armor with 76mm rounds. After 3 hits in the same general area, a section of armor plate simply detaches and falls away. The metallurgist photographs the fractured edges for the technical report. Conclusions? German armor quality varies wildly. Some plates from Tigers show adequate properties, properly tempered, reasonable alloy content. But Panther production from 1944 is consistently defective. High carbon, insufficient molybdenum, improper heat treatment, inconsistent quality control. The intelligence implications spread immediately. Soviet field manuals update. German heavy tank armor can be defeated through cumulative damage. Multiple hits in the same area will induce catastrophic cracking. American ordnance testing at Aberdeen confirms similar findings. British intelligence photographs cracked Panther turrets for training materials. The message is consistent. German armor has failed at the molecular level. But some German vehicles still show excellent protection. Tiger tanks built in early 1943. Panthers from specific factories. The quality is erratic, dependent on which forced laborers sabotaged which production lines, which stockpiles of proper alloys remained, which heat treatment operators maintained correct temperatures. German procurement officers know the truth. They receive field reports of catastrophic armor failures. They order production increased, because brittle armor is better than no armor, and there are no good options left. May 8, 1945. A Panther Ausf G sits abandoned in Berlin. The glacis plate shows 3 distinct crack patterns radiating from impact points, none penetrated. All compromise the armor structurally. The crew abandoned the vehicle not because it was destroyed, but because they could no longer trust the steel around them. An American technical intelligence officer photographs the damage for post-war analysis. The cracks tell the complete story. Brilliant engineering destroyed by resource starvation and desperate chemistry. The final accounting is devastating. By June 1944, molybdenum had vanished from all German armor production. Nickel became trace-only except in the heaviest plates. Manganese supply collapsed when Ukraine fell. Chromium remained, but without modifying elements, it induced grain coarsening and brittleness. German metallurgists had tried everything, increasing carbon to maintain hardness, boosting manganese for strength, adjusting heat treatment cycles. But chemistry is unforgiving. Remove molybdenum and steel loses toughness. Add excessive carbon and weldability collapses. Rush heat treatment and martensite forms. The result? 6,000 Panthers built with armor that could shatter under fire. Thousands of crew members protected by steel that had become ceramic. The legacy extends beyond World War II. Modern armor steel still uses molybdenum, typically 0.25 to 0.40%, for exactly the reasons German engineers discovered in the 1930s. It prevents temper embrittlement, maintains fine-grained structure, and provides impact toughness that carbon and chromium alone cannot deliver. The Panther's armor failure became a metallurgical case study, a cautionary tale about substitution chemistry and the importance of quality control under pressure, about how strategic bombing can target not factories but the periodic table itself, about how the finest engineering in the world fails without the right elements. The Germans designed perfect steel. Then they lost access to the alloys that made it work, and thousands died in tanks that cracked like porcelain. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources.